Second.
Minutes have been moved and seconded. Thank you. Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Are there any agenda additions or deletions? Seeing none, the next committee meeting will be October 20th at 4 p.m. in Council Chambers. Item number 1, application by Regional Animal Protection Society for a zoning text amendment at 13340 Smallwood Place. Mr. Rockerby?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing to add to the report, though I would emphasize that the proposed zoning text amendment would apply to this property only. The applicant does have the support of the property owner as well as the Richmond Auto Mall Association. And the zoning text amendment is seeking to legitimize a land use that was previously permitted through a council-endorsed temporary use permit. Any other questions? I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Any questions from committee?
Move the recommendation. Second.
Recommendation has been moved and seconded. I don't see any questions, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is carried. Thank you. Item number 2, appointment of approving officer. Mr. Craig, Mr. Rice.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Nothing to highlight today, nothing further to add, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from committee?
Move the recommendation.
Second.
The recommendation has been moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you, and welcome, Paul Sandu, to the City of Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Paul was with our department a number of years ago before a brief hiatus with the city's transportation department. We are happy to have him back as part of our development applications team.
All right, thanks for that. Item number 3, proposed market rental housing policy changes and low-end market rental Lemur program updates. For committee, there are 2 pieces of correspondence on table, one from Van Prop and one from Mr. John Roston. What I've suggested with staff is they're going to give us a summary. We do have 2 delegations wanting to speak tonight, and then we are going to go through each of the proposals one by one and have a discussion as we go through each one of them. So, Mr. Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I was going to say, we don't have anything further to add to the report, but we'd like to provide a brief overview. To begin with, staff recognize that there have been multiple discussions on proposed changes to the city's low-end market rental program and market rental housing policy. The recommendations in front of you today are consistent with the recommendations that have been brought forward to you in previous reports. The difference is that they have been broken up into subsections so that committee can decide on them one at a time. If one of the subsections is not supported, the rest of the recommendations can move forward on their own. The recommendations would apply to sites that require rezoning and also to pre-zoned multifamily residential sites. Together, they would maximize the number of rental housing units secured through development without creating significant financial risks for private developers. Our economic consultant, Mr. Jerry Mulholland from GP Rollo & Associates, is also here if there are any questions on economic feasibility. So to summarize, the staff recommendations, which can be considered one at a time, include recommendation number 1, increase the Lemur floor area contribution rate from 10 to 15% within the city center. Recommendation number 2, to update Lemur cash and lieu rates to reflect current construction costs and sale prices in Richmond, and to reflect the 15% Lemur requirement in the city center. Recommendations 3 to 6, introduce a mandatory 10% market rental requirement and associated cash and lieu option. Recommendation number 7 applies a 1-year grandfathering period for in-stream development applications. And recommendation number 8 recommends that staff monitor and report back to council regarding key findings in 2 years. Finally, recommendation number 9 recommends that staff review the feasibility of waiving development cost charges for built affordable housing developments with rental rates established below standard Lemur rates. The staff are here to answer any questions, and we'll be here to, I guess, introduce each recommendation when the time comes. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And we will move to the delegations. Mr. Dana Westermark is here in person with us today. Please come forward, and you will have 5 minutes. You introduce yourself and 5 minutes.
I get to be on camera as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm glad to be able to do so in person after such a long hiatus. I wanted to speak to the issue of the affordable housing changes and my concerns that there's been a lack of metrics applied to the affordable housing. As the chair of the UDI Richmond Liaison Committee meeting for 6 years, I repeatedly asked at those meetings, what metrics were being used to evaluate the affordable housing program. How did you know that you were achieving success? Beyond simply saying we've created so many units, who were those units being occupied by? Were the people who were occupying those units originally from Richmond, or had they moved from another jurisdiction? Were they moving up from less expensive or lower quality housing to better quality housing? Or were they moving from more expensive housing to these more affordable units? None of those metrics are available. And I think that it's really important that council has a clear understanding of first of all, what your goals are, what constitutes success. And simply saying we're creating X number of affordable housing units is not a valid metric. But on top of that, understanding whether you are achieving success. And if the metric that you were using as a way to understand whether you were successful or not was that you were creating X number of affordable housing units, well, the city has achieved its goals. It's been successful in creating the number of affordable housing units that you originally set out to create on an annual basis. So further tinkering with the affordable housing strategy really would require revisiting what your goals are. And if your goals are not simply to create a number of housing units, but in fact to affect the full spectrum of affordability, I don't think you're achieving your goals. And there are a whole bunch of other ways that the city could incentivize rental housing, could make a meaningful impact on reducing the cost of rental housing, and moreover, could provide ways of achieving market affordable housing that is presently unavailable to our young families wanting to start households in Richmond. So I think it's really an opportunity with this report coming back largely unchanged from the previous time it was brought forward, and Councillor Steeves encouraged everyone to send it back to staff. The report that's in front of you today doesn't differ substantially from that report, and the same flaws are there. It's really an opportunity now to say, okay, we don't want a regurgitation of this last report. What we want is some meaningful efforts to come up with a strategy that will achieve certain objectives and define those objectives so that you know what it is you're doing, how you're going to do it, and you can measure that you've accomplished it. And unfortunately, I don't think that's happening with the present affordable housing strategy. I'm going to ask that you consider sending the report back to staff and consider the possibility of striking a committee, either of planners, architects, other interested parties, in putting together some of the strategies that have been used in other jurisdictions with great success. So Seattle has had a huge impact on their available rental. They've moved their vacancy rate from below 1% to over 4%. Kelowna has been successful in keeping its vacancy rates down, or vacancy rates up, I should say, and making rentals available. They've also been very successful in providing market affordable housing with some of the initiatives they've brought in the inner city residential neighborhoods. So I think there are lots of examples out there of successful strategies to achieve the goals and objectives that council might have.
Hey, you've reached your 5 minutes. If you could just wrap up, please. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I don't think that the strategy is it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you have a question here. Councillor Day, is it for the delegation?
Very much, Mr. Westermark, for coming forward. It's so nice to have another person in the council chambers. You were mentioning that how do we measure success? We don't know what we need until we learn what we need and whether or not we're successful. But I'm referring to attachment 3, which is on page 43 of our package, and also to page 33. And it says that city staff estimate there's an annual demand for approximately 270 low-end market units and 190 market units. So and this is based on census. And then staff went ahead and used the census data and this change to estimate how many we would end up getting, both of the low-end market and the market rentals, and we're still about 150 short. So how is this, I mean, you're saying that we don't know the numbers, but according to the census and to the statistics that we got from the federal government, we seem to have a fairly good handle on what the need is. So could you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. So I'm referring to the original affordable housing strategy, which defines certain objectives. And the assumption with the original affordable housing strategy was that you weren't necessarily going to supply all of, in fact, it's not possible. If you were going to try to meet the demand of affordable housing for the entire GVRD, you're not getting there. However, the level of housing that was that you expected to try to achieve, you have in fact achieved, and I don't have the report memorized, I'm afraid, and I don't have it in front of me for reference, but my recollection of the original study or the original report was you had defined certain metrics, you've met those, and you've exceeded them. So if you're now changing the goalposts and you're setting new metrics, well, okay, but maybe you should understand whether or not you're achieving the objectives that you've set out. You have no idea who's living in these apartments. There's no understanding of whether or not you are delivering service to the target group of people, or you're just simply creating affordable housing and people who are qualifying on the income requirement are occupying those houses, those units, and not reporting their spouse's income, not reporting additional income that they may earn outside of their job. Who is occupying these units? You have no idea. Whether they're from Richmond, whether they're from Burnaby, whether they're from Surrey, whether they're from Ontario, you have no idea. So I think it's important to have a more fine-grained analysis than the superficial analysis of just X number of units.
Madam Chair, maybe we could ask that question of staff later.
Yeah, I've noted that. Thank you. Councillor Steves.
Yeah, I've got a question. You may recall several years ago, Councillor Linda Barnes and I voted against one of your developments at Stevenson Highway and Railway because you were doing what council required in terms of density, and I'm still voting against all the proposals of rezonings in that area of Railway Avenue because I believe that one way of providing more affordable housing is to densify and have smaller units on larger areas of land. I just wondered if you could comment on ways that we can actually increase the amount of affordable housing in Richmond.
Well, if what you're talking about is market affordable housing,
yeah.
the approach that's been used really successfully in Kelowna has been a type of zoning that is predicated on the lot width. So if you have a lot up to 40 feet wide, you're allowed to build 2 units on it. Up to 50 feet wide, you're allowed to build 3 units on it. 50 feet and over, you're allowed to build 4 units on it. And that's also within a sort of a form-based code where they're looking at the volume of the building, so certain setbacks applied to the site, and increasing the FAR permitted quite significantly. So it's allowing a 0.8 FAR as opposed to Richmond's 0.65, or on single-family lots 0.55. And with the higher floor area ratio, you're getting, slightly bigger units. So they're creating units that are between 1,300 square feet up to 1,600 square feet, 4 units on an inner city single-family lot. And these are selling for, in Kelowna, give or take $700,000 a pop. The same thing done on one of the 66-foot lots in the Mons or the Moors. Those same fourplexes would generate units that were around about $1 million selling price. $1 million is a lot of money, but relative to the cost of single-family houses, it's pretty cheap. And relative to the same utility, so a 3-bedroom house that you can actually raise a family in, to buy something comparable in Steveston, which is one of the few areas that have houses of that size, you're looking high million. So $1.8 million, $1.9 million to get the same kind of utility. So this is a way to provide reasonably affordable market housing in these single-family neighborhoods. If trying to go into the single... Sorry?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
If trying to go into the single-family neighborhoods is too much to ask, and that there isn't sort of a political will to do that, then actually blanket zoning all of the arterial roads, irrespective of whether or not the lots front the arterial road or back onto the arterial road, because about 40% of the available lots on the arterial roads are not available right now because they are lots that back onto an arterial instead of fronting onto an arterial. So if you opened all of those up and actually zoned them, not just OCP'd them, that would be a very fast way to convert these properties to relatively affordable housing.
Yeah, thanks.
Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Steves?
No, that's fine. Great, thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mayor?
I've got a question of staff, but of the delegation, you talk about market affordable housing. Now, I know what market housing is. I know what affordable housing is. Are you talking about market housing that is affordable? Is that what you mean?
Correct. And, I think that's one of the challenges with the conversation about affordable housing is there's a whole bunch of different definitions of what constitutes affordable housing.
Yeah, sometimes I've heard the description attainable housing instead of affordable housing.
Perhaps, yeah.
I think that makes a point. As I say, I've got a question of staff when it's appropriate.
Councillor Wolf, is your question for the delegation? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, yes, thank you so much, through the chair to delegation. Just my very brief question here is if you could provide a comment. You mentioned other ways to incentivize affordable housing, but I didn't hear a question about the lower market affordable housing. So if you could speak to ways maybe not related to the single family existing areas, but to the other, from your experience or in other areas, what have you seen as ways that are successful that your industry has gravitated to?
So in Seattle, they introduced a program where they allowed allowed development of rental housing on any property anywhere in the city. So this meant that you could apply for to build a rental apartment building in the midst of a single-family neighborhood. They set certain parameters to that, they set certain height limits to it and so forth, but you could build rental property pretty much anywhere you wanted. The result of that has been that rental rates have gone from below 1% up to approximately 4%. Landlords are offering incentives to tenants of 2 months free rent, a flat screen TV, other utilities paid for the first 2 years, other incentives to get people to move into new buildings because the supply has so rapidly increased. It's had the corollary effect of reducing rents on buildings that are existing buildings. So substandard housing, people have moved out of those units into the new units because they're relatively affordable. The ones that they've vacated, they don't have the same demand, so the price of those units has fallen, and the overall rental rate in Seattle has declined over the last 2 years for the first time in 30 years. So, it's been a very effective program. It's worked extremely well. And I think that the key element that one needs to take away from that is that has made rent more affordable for every single solitary renter, not only the few that are lucky enough to get an affordable housing unit. So that has been an effective program for every single renter. Right now, the only people that benefit from Richmond's program are the few that are lucky enough to get one of the affordable housing units.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Councillor Al. Can't hear you.
Yes, I want to thank Mr. Westermark for your comments, because I think you raised a very good point in the sense that as a city, we have increased supply, but practically, perhaps, we don't know whether or not we've met the needs, or, we are meeting the needs of the people who need it. We are not sure if we are meeting the needs of people who live in our city. And I can understand that if the other cities are not moving forward in the same direction at the same rate, an increase in supply in our city could only be addressing other people's problem. And you talk about, other ways to measure. I want to ask you, do you have models, do you have examples of how other cities measure their success in relation to, the demand and supply and addressing the right clients? So do you have examples of that?
I can't say that I do. I don't know what the metrics are that Seattle has used, although I think you can take the increase in vacancy rate as being a pretty good metric of success. If you wanted to substantially increase the supply of rental housing in Richmond without resorting to the very aggressive strategy that Seattle employed, the other alternative is to make appropriate use of the residential rental tenure provisions that the provincial government has recently granted to municipalities. And you could take a neighborhood, for example, like the Spires neighborhood, and actually zone it, not do the OCP, but zone it to allow for 6-story wood frame apartment buildings that are only if they're rental. And your alternative would be to build a single family house or build a 6-story wood frame apartment building and make it rental. This would be a palatable solution for the people that live in that neighborhood that are looking to exit that neighborhood. They get paid a reasonable price for their home because it's increased in value because it's a higher density rental property. But it also leaves the property more affordable than it would be to buy property that was specifically going to be used for market affordable housing. So it's kind of a way of creating relatively affordable rentals in a neighborhood close to the downtown core, and without disrupting, a single-family neighborhood that perhaps wants to remain intact, and creating that relatively affordable rental pool. And in that situation, you could even consider applying some limitations on what the maximum rent was for the first 5 years or first 10 years or whatever. But it would be a mechanism to create a lot of rental housing, opening up the opportunity to drive down rental rates across the city.
Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, just a quick question just following up on that. You talk about metrics, and in Seattle and Kelowna, and they've done X, Y, and Z. And I guess my question in the example you gave, and I don't dispute anything you've done in Kelowna, where they've taken 30-foot and put 2 homes, et cetera, et cetera. That's great for the homeowner, okay, that might want to buy it, and obviously the prices will come down. But I'm more concerned about those that we're talking about market rental. We need rental. We need places where people can live, period. And I guess my concern is, do we have metrics if they're bringing their amount of rental options up, metrics on the kinds of things that they built? Like, for example, in Spires Road, you say 6-story wood frame. I would respect your point of view, but in my opinion, a block or 2 blocks from the SkyTrain, we should be doing 14 stories. I don't care. I mean, that's just my own personal opinion. You say 6 stories, to me, that's still in there. We shouldn't be doing 6 stories. That's not maximizing on those small. We should be going up. So I guess my question is, do we have metrics on the kinds of things that might get it, like how many 6 stories and how many units would we get? Because if they're taking a single family lot, which even in the downtown core, which would only be, let's assume 50 feet by 100, just for sake of argument. I mean, I'll take mine on Williams Road. It's 50 by 105, okay? Wouldn't get 2 townhomes in there, 3 towns. We're always building townhomes. We're building, it seems that that's all the development community is doing. We're not getting the option. Nobody has come forward with, hey, well, I apologize. I forgot the company at the, maybe some staff can help me, at the Cactus Club. They came forward, all right? As far as I'm concerned, go up to 14 stories, maximize density there. So I'm looking sort of for metrics on it, as opposed to, yes, we want to provide smaller homes. People are not, planting, well, I hope they're planting gardens, but not doing what our folks did and we have done. So I guess that's what I'm looking at.
Okay, let's hear the answer.
I know it's a tough one, but you've probably studied it more than anybody.
There's different aspects to this. One is the affordable, relatively, perhaps I should use the term Mayor Brody put out, was, that you attainable,
yes,
housing. And that's what I think you can do by taking your property and allowing, in your case, it would be 3 homes on that property. But again, Kelowna is another jurisdiction which has had a lot of success with their rental initiatives. And one of them is that they've allowed 6-story wood frame buildings on some of the major arterial roads. So, and these are close proximity to downtown, close proximity to high-rise zoning. In fact, in some cases, they're 2 blocks away from towers. But the economics of it are that 6-story wood frame is much more affordable to build. So because of the relatively low cost of construction, you can make rental work easier. If you go into concrete towers, the cost of construction shoots up significantly. So in the case of the property you were talking about at the Cactus Club, the people who've owned that property have owned it for a very, very long time. And you know, in my opinion, they're kind of looking to make a contribution to Richmond in terms of providing housing that's desperately needed in that location. And you know, I don't know where they are in the approval process, but in my opinion, they should have gotten approved in about 6 weeks. But anyway, the upshot of it is that the only way that they're able to do that is because they've owned that land for a generation or more. If you're going to encourage people to go out and buy property and build new rental on that property, then you have to do something to keep the price of the property under control. Residential rental tenure zoning would do that. And then you also have to provide them with a format, 6-story wood frame, that is relatively affordable to construct.
That's the end of questions to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Westermark. We really appreciate your comments. Okay, questions to staff now. Councillor Day?
Oh, yeah, Mr. Westermark said that we don't know who's living in these affordable units. Could staff comment on that?
Madam Chair, perhaps I can deal with that one to Councillor Day. We actually have an annual declaration process to ensure that the Lemur units are occupied by people that meet the requirements of the housing agreement that Council approves and is registered on title. So while we may not know to the nth degree the things that Mr. Westermark might like to know, we can confirm that annually there is a follow-up to ensure that the conditions of the housing agreement are met, and in particular the income thresholds are met. And frankly, I don't think it's helpful to be speculating whether people are declaring income or not. That is not something that is unique, if it's occurring, unique to Lemur housing. If it's an issue, then it's an issue generally within the community. So there are strict rules and they're checked annually.
Mr. Mayor.
All right. My question is really along the same lines. Just hang on a sec. About those metrics. Now, when we say that there's a yearly declaration, who gets that declaration? Does the city get that?
Madam Chair.
Does the city get it?
Yes. Madam Chair, perhaps I can ask Kim or Cody to get into the specifics of that process.
Yes. Through the chair to Mayor Brody, the city works closely with property managers to complete the statutory declaration process, and that information is provided directly to the city.
All right. So the declaration says that they meet the income threshold, right?
Through the chair to Mayor Brody, that's correct.
Now, what about the other metrics that we've been talking about? How many people are in the unit, where they used to be living, what is the need basically, what's the vacancy rate, the occupancy rate, and that sort of thing. How much of that do we know?
Through the chair to Mayor Brody, all of that information is collected with the exception of where the tenants previously lived. And we have been advised that due to privacy concerns, we're limited in the number of questions we can ask in that regard.
Well, we may be limited by privacy concerns, but the fact is that the affordable housing is being provided for a specific purpose. Surely we're allowed to inquire whether that purpose is being met. Are we? I mean, we're allowed to ask about occupancy rates.
Yeah, through the chair to Mayor Brody, staff also work quite closely with property managers on an ongoing basis to emphasize, the general mandate and objectives of the program and to ensure that they're prioritizing eligible tenants.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think I don't want to get in the way of this entire set of resolutions, but I do think that we should get more information on the metrics, because armed with those metrics and the approaches, you know, that's the way that we can decide whether our program is effective. The delegation has said all we know is the number of units and whether they meet the income thresholds, but surely there's much more to deciding whether we're meeting the Richmond affordable housing needs than just that kind of information. So I think in due course, you know, I'd like to make a referral motion to get more information.
All right, I've noted that. Councillor Lieu.
Thank you, through the chair. You know, this was a huge piece that's come forward, so I have a couple questions for staff here on this. On one of the things on the whole expediting the application process on the rental, so if you have a market rental building, do we have an understanding of what a typical time frame took? And so what is the new time frame that somebody can sort of think that they're getting? So like if I was the developer of a market rental place, if I thought that ordinarily it's going to take 3 years to get through it and I can get through in 18 months, then I can add that kind of into my pro forma and figure out how much I'm making. If I just know that, well, I'm at the top of the list, but you still don't have any planners working for you, well, how does that help me? So do we have any metrics on that one to understand what an expedited application process means to a builder?
Through the chair to Councillor Lieu, in terms of an expedited process, I would make the comparison of a HOV lane on a standard road. There's a stream that applications are reviewed on. 100% rental projects are placed in a separate stream. It is not possible to give you an indication as to absolute time savings involved, because the ability to advance an application to council for consideration requires action from the city, as well as action from the developer and their consultants. Overall, what I would say is that there is a significant time savings in the amount of staff time required to review an application, which is the part of the process which we control.
Okay. Now, we've sort of talked about having this mandatory market rental, and it seems to me that in attachment 5 on PLN 45, you talk about sort of some reducing parking rates, but that's not embedded in what's conceived of here. Is that correct? Or could we add that, or is that something that we sort of put back and re-massage through?
Through the chair to Councillor Lieu, the parking rates that are on page PLN 45, they do indicate existing reduced parking rates for rental units. So there is no recommendation to reduce them any further, but they are already embedded into our zoning bylaw.
Right, but it does.
Madam Chair.
It does talk about a potential reduced rate to 0.54 for secured rental. So is that in it, or is that conceived that it could go down to that?
It is already embedded into our zoning bylaw, so those parking incentives are already included for market rental and Lemur units.
Madam Chair, perhaps I can add to that, if I may. You already in your zoning bylaw have a significant reduction for parking for rental. So folks have been suggesting we should do that. In fact, it's already in your bylaw and you've been doing it for several years. In addition to that, on a site-specific, development-specific basis, subject to a suitable site and a parking analysis being conducted, we have also reduced the parking considerably below the reduced level in the zoning bylaw. But that is done on a case-specific, project-specific basis, because some sites, because of their location, are more conducive to further reductions, and some developments, because of their composition, their unit size and type and likely tenants, are also more conducive to further reductions. So I think it's fair to say that this is something that we already do, and it's absolutely not an impediment to a rental project in Richmond.
Okay. But we haven't seen actually that many rental projects come forward, though. That's the other thing, right? And we actually haven't seen any, or have we seen any that are trying to convert the existing ones? So, like, I think of, say, the Fraser Place apartments down in Steveston, and, you know, they're getting on in age, but we don't really have a system to help those guys move along. We could give them some more FAR, but we still have all these other rules that are sort of layered on top of it, like the relocation rules, the right of refusal, a whole bunch of other things. So, you know, I think if we make enforced market and then we still have all these other rules attached to it at the same time, I think we're not really making it very easy for people to create rental in Richmond.
Madam Chair, I would say that, in fact, you have had a lot of rental projects, and we did provide the statistics to you. Even with a voluntary incentive-based approach, we have brought forward about 800 rental units in the last year and a half, 2 years, and I believe, and Wayne will correct me if I'm too far out, I believe there's another 600 or 700 rental units in the pipeline. So I would not agree that there hasn't been a significant amount of rental brought forward and approved. They've all been expedited, and what I would say is that for the redevelopment of an existing rental site, which is a slightly different animal to building market rental on a typical development site, the city council does have policy around how existing tenants are treated. And I think it's appropriate policy, and I think it's good policy, and certainly staff take it seriously, because we do not want to have people evicted from their homes on a whim. But I would not characterize that policy as, unnecessary regulation or an impediment to bringing forward rental projects. Really much of this is on the developers too. If they do an honest job and bring forward a good project and meet the council policies, they are absolutely expedited through the process. There's no question about that.
So in the potential numbers that are being added on the square footage, we're talking about, say, so for something in city center, like 1,000 square foot apartment, adding the affordable housing and the rental piece on it, it could potentially add, $28.50 per square foot. So on 1,000 square foot home, it could add $28,500 on the cost of that home. It seems to add a lot to the cost of it, and I think in the townhouse homes, it adds quite a bit. Now, do we have, and maybe this will be a referral or something to look into this, do we apply the affordable housing charge on townhouses that have micro suites in them? So I'm thinking about, like, say, where Van Prop has proposed to put townhouses down the east side, right next to Kwantlen College. So presumably micro suites there would be quite handy. Those probably wouldn't need any parking because they'd be students who are coming in. They're temporary people. They have access to transit and bikes and whatever else. Now, have we thought about that? Is that embedded in this anywhere?
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Wayne, maybe in due course, to respond to the mechanics of applying the charge to the townhouses. But what I would say about the market price of housing is that when you introduce a requirement, say, for Lemur units, and there's a cost to that to a developer, certainly that cost is reflected in the pro forma for the development. And Jerry Mulholland is here, and he's far more expert than I am in this, if you want to go deeper. But so while the requirement for a Lemur unit or a 10% Lemur, it does add a cost component to the pro forma for a development project. It is wrong to assume that that cost changes the market price of that unit, because Economics 101 tells us that the unit sells for the market price that the market will bear. So the short of it is that if the city asks for less in terms of Lemur or any other requirement, there is absolutely no guarantee and no correlation to a lower market price, because every unit always sells for what the market will bear at the time of sale. So we shouldn't assume that if the city does less or asks for less, that housing will be cheaper in Richmond. Quite likely, the most likely outcome is simply that a developer will realise a bigger profit margin, and there will be no change in the price, the market price of that housing unit.
Well, if we don't build anything, then the demand will keep going up, and so it will slide up that supply curve, and you'll end up with higher prices. Now, so maybe we can have a referral to analyze waiving the affordable contributions on the micro suites themselves, if there is for that, but that's for later. So my last question is, for the Lemur units, is there an asset declaration in conjunction with the income declaration? And is that something we should be asking for? Because it seems to me there's some people who are retired, whatever else, and sure, maybe they're living off a limited income, but just because they have their $1 million in GICs and they're living off that and they have a low income doesn't mean they don't have any money. So do we look at that?
To the Chair, to Councillor Lieu, no, income testing is not currently a component of the Lemur program, but as previously mentioned, we work closely with the property managers to ensure they're prioritizing eligible tenants.
Councillor McNulty?
Yes, thank you. I just want to follow up on Mayor Brody and Councillor Lieu in how we ascertain who is in those suites. I think we need to follow Metro Vancouver's, who happen to be a landlord and housing policy. Tax forms are required of all residents within those suites and those houses. And generally speaking, they're families, single moms, whatever, on the housing the Metro Vancouver manages. And they do ask for an asset declaration. So to say we can't do it, somebody is already doing it. And I'm saying I think we should look at it, because when we farm it out to the whim of an agency, and we say Joe Smith has 100 units here and it's going to be managed by McNulty and Associates, you're going to take the word of McNulty and Associates as opposed to whatever, and here it is, and whether I give you the right information or not. And this is the thing that where Metro Vancouver has got around that. So I would ask staff to look into that and talk to the housing board at, well, not the board, the people at Metro Vancouver on it. I think it's important. I did have, to the chair, I guess my concern is we have other delegations, and we're really into the meat and potatoes of things, but I'd like to hear from the other delegations.
Yeah, we have two questions, and then we'll get to the next delegation.
Are we okay?
Thank you. You have a question?
Yeah, I do have one more. In terms of our approval times, and on it, Mr. Ersick made a comment, and I no doubt that we fast track those that are prepared to do all rental on it, and I think that's correct on it, and obviously that does reduce the cost if they can get things through a lot faster than doing the other things for approval time. So is there such a thing as a possibility of an established approval time, like a calendar? Here are the 10 things you need to do before you come forward. Here's a checklist. You're doing all rental on my 50-foot lot. If you don't have these checks, don't come in, because we're not going to deal with it. You bring them in, we can do it bang, bang, bang through that. I don't know if any other community has that. Maybe I'm asking for something that doesn't exist. But I would think that there would be a checklist that one would have to do. Again, I'm sorry, my ignorance. I have not gone to look for forms or anything like that as a developer, but it would be good as if we could have something. And
let's hear from staff then.
Yeah, thank you.
Madam Chair, yes, in fact, we do that. For an expedited application, we sit down with the applicant and we identify what's required at their end and also the city's commitments. And I heard earlier that something should have been a 6-week approval. Well, actually, it's more complicated than that. And the actual processing time is highly dependent on the quality and the speed with which consultants for the developer, for the applicant work. But yes, we do sit down, we identify the requirements, we have special meetings, and we also identify a schedule. And I might add that because there's been a lot of discussion about expediting rental and providing additional density. And I would just point out that, in fact, we've already approved projects in the Spires area where we've moved from a townhouse form to a low-rise apartment form with rental housing, extra density, extra height. And we're currently processing and expediting similar applications in that area and elsewhere within the city for market rental housing.
Thank you.
Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you. Through the chair, because you have delegations waiting, I think I'll just defer my questions till later. Thank you.
All right, and I did have a question. So we do have an affordable housing strategy, and as committee knows, the referral, it was a referral that brought us to the point that where we are. So some of the questions the delegate, or some of the statements the delegate made about how do we know what success looked like, the demographics in Richmond, are they not found in our affordable housing strategy? And where are we in the cycle of, we update it about every 5 years. We get an update to committee and council every year, but we actually update the whole affordable housing strategy about every 5 or 6 years. So where are we in that process?
Madam Chair, the affordable housing strategy considered a range of indicators and census data trends related to all sorts of aspects of housing affordability for Richmond residents. And that data analysis directly informed the development of the strategic directions and the various actions defined in the strategy. In terms of where we're at in the strategy cycle, the affordable housing strategy was approved in 2018. And it's a 10-year strategy, and so it will be up for renewal in 2027, approximately.
But it could be renewed at council direction at any time. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, yes.
And when we look at the official community plan, would that inform any changes to the affordable housing strategy?
Madam Chair, perhaps I can tackle that because we're in the process of bringing you terms of reference for the official community plan review. The official community plan review will look in considerable detail at the possibilities of doing increases in density in established and other neighbourhoods with a view to creating more affordable market ownership housing. So that will be front and centre in the OCP review. But of course, today we're looking at different types of housing. We're looking at the low-end market rental and the market rental housing.
All right, thank you. Okay, we will get to the second delegation. Mr. Roston, you are here? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And thank you for being here today. And you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. A couple of comments on what's been said so far. I think in terms of Seattle, where they changed the whole rental market, not just in terms of providing new rental housing, but lowering rents on rental housing in general. This is because they're adding thousands of new rental units. So when staff tell you all we need is 190 market rental units, that's totally ridiculous. That would have absolutely no effect on the rental market. So, I mean, we really have to get serious in terms of thinking of large quantities of market rental. Secondly, in terms of, well, who on earth is moving here anyway? And, you know, do they live off in Langley? And if we create a lot of rental housing, are they going to move here and take up housing here? The fact is, I mean, it's buried in a footnote in the staff report in Appendix 3, is that we have 30,000 people who commute from elsewhere to work in Richmond. They work here, they're serving us, and they spend huge amounts of their day commuting. We're talking 30,000 people. Now, what are these people doing? Well, they're providing us with all kinds of services. And the answer is, if they can find work closer to where they live, they're going to switch jobs and work elsewhere. And that's why they're already doing it. That's why our businesses are having so much trouble finding staff. And it's going to have an impact on us, on the people who own housing here, like us, most of us anyway, who own housing here, are perfectly comfortable in our housing, but this problem with rental housing is going to affect us. And the other part of it is first responders. I've spoken to a number of Richmond first responders. They can't afford rental housing here. Now, if, God forbid, there's a natural disaster that affects the bridges, what on earth are we going to do? We are going to be in serious trouble. We have to make rental housing available for our first responders. We already know there's a nursing shortage. Nurses now pick where they live. They can pick the hospital they work in. The demand is huge. And many of our nurses cannot afford to live here. We have to provide rental housing in the city center close to the hospital. And maybe when you've got your shovels out to break ground for the new tower, you might think about how on earth we're going to get the nurses we need to serve us there. Okay, so the other part of it has to do with profitability. And I'm not going to repeat all the things we submitted to you. We submitted to you a whole bunch of data that we got from the provincial government, which contradicts all the information you've been getting in the staff report about offering incentives to people for developers to build rental housing. Now, as you know, one of those items was the tax exemptions. So the staff report says, no, we can't offer those sorts of tax exemptions. The fact is, Kelowna, which we've just been talking about, offers a 10-year tax exemption on new rental housing. That is of huge benefit to the developer. Even if the developer doesn't want to manage the housing and wants to sell it to a pension plan, that makes that property far more valuable and increases the profitability. The other thing that goes with it, as Mr. Westermark pointed out, is rental tenure zoning, which we have been talking to you about for the last 4 years and which you refuse to implement. And that is the way. You zone land for rental. That's all people can build on it. And you should be doing that with large tracts in the city center. There aren't that many of them, but you're about to let Polygon Talisman go out and build a huge amount of rental condos on it. And it just drives me crazy to hear some of you talk about how, well, if everybody rents out their condo, there's no problem. I've supplied you with a chart from CMHC that shows, in terms of rents on purpose-built rental, are about $5,000 a year less than the equivalent rental on equivalent strata condos.
Hey, You've gone your 5 minutes. If you could wrap up, please.
Okay, so what's the summary? The summary is we have the land, we have the tools. What we need is your will to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. Councillor Wolf, a question for the delegate?
Yes, if I may, through the chair to the delegation. Same question I had to the last delegation. I'm not sure if you mentioned anything else that would be targeting the low-end market rental as incentive. So something that's in the report, or something that's not in the report that you've identified. I know you just mentioned a few tax exemptions. You gave us an example of a 10-year one in our province that exists. Is there anything else that is specifically for the Lemur units?
Yeah, that's the development cost charges, which, you know, every developer who comes to talk to you talks to you about somehow reducing development cost charges, which are based on actual costs of roads and sewers and all the rest of that. But the fact is, and we checked this with the provincial government, you can reduce the development cost charges for low-end market rental housing. So that's a huge advantage, gives a huge advantage to the developer in terms of making the low-end market rental housing more profitable than it would otherwise be. But you can also do the same thing with housing that is close to market rental. In other words, the requirement is that the rental be below whatever market rental is. You know, usually people take the yardstick of CMHC reports on what the rentals are. But even if the rental is 95% of market, then you're allowed under provincial law to lower the development cost charges. So that would be the place where I would be looking on a scale. So the lower the rent, the lower the development cost charges. Now, one of the things that staff have pointed out is that development cost charges cover things like roads and sewers, and somebody or other has to pay for them. So I think the city has to get serious and say, if we are really going to be serious about low-end market rental, we do have to be willing to absorb some of these costs of roads and sewers. We have to make some contribution. We're not going to get it for free.
Thank you. Just through the chair, again, thanks for the package sent ahead of time and the comments on the first responders. I definitely echo that sentiment. And thank you for the graph you provided. That shows a lot of the difference between what we're hoping for and what we might be getting. So thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions. So thank you again, Mr. Austin. And we will go back to staff to go through the recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To begin with, we'll start with the first recommendation, which recommends increasing the Lemur floor area contribution rate from 10 to 15% within the city center for projects with more than 60 units. This is based on an economic analysis which suggests that a Lemur contribution rate of 15% inside of the city center area plan would be feasible for most developments. Increasing this rate above 15% would introduce moderate to significant risk for other developments and may limit the city's ability to negotiate additional community amenities. So alternatively, committee and council could consider phasing in the Lemur floor area contribution rate. However, 15% is determined to be feasible for the majority of developments. We're happy to answer any questions on the first recommendation.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much. I'm intrigued by the idea of creating a rental zone, say between Westminster Highway, Granville, number 3, and Garden City in the Spires neighborhood. If we were to do that, would the numbers be increased significantly from the ones that were quoted on, GP 44, I think. Sorry. Because the numbers that you quoted and rentals that we would get was lower than what we need. So I think that was page, sorry, I've lost it. 33. page 33. So you basically, in there, it says that if we do these changes, we would end up with, on page PLN 34, 180 Lemur units and 125 secured market rental units. But that would still put us below the 460 that we need each year. So if we were to do a blanket zoning for that area between Spires, like Spires neighborhood, basically between Westchester Highway, Granville, number 3, and Garden City, could those numbers come up significantly with these changes?
Madam Chair, perhaps I can respond to that one, to Councillor Day. We actually have a report ready that will come to the next Planning Committee meeting dealing with the Spires Road referral. And the short answer to your question is yes, those numbers would go up. And in the report that we will be bringing you, we actually have information around both projects where we have, council has approved extra density in a different form, higher buildings for market rental. And we are currently negotiating with 3 developers in that area over and above what we're recommending today for even more market rental housing with density bonusing and height and form concessions. So, yes, the numbers that you've referred to are an estimate of what would be generated if you adopt what's on the table today. But in addition to that, there are other initiatives underway which would bring those numbers even higher.
That's fantastic news. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hobbs. Councillor Hobbs? Can't hear you.
I know, I was searching frantically for the button. And through the chair, just on the one that we're talking about with the Lemur, if the increase goes from 10 to 15%, and I know we're speaking averages here, but there is an increased cost per unit in terms of the strata units that would be sold. So in total, when you're talking about attainable housing for people that might be buying, if you're talking like a 2-bedroom unit, 1,000 square feet or something, do you have that information available right now? In general terms, what the additional cost would be? I'm getting feedback, I don't know if you are, but what the additional cost would be per unit on an average size, large development of, say, 100 units or something.
Yeah, we're having some technical issues here right now, so sorry about the feedback. My iPad is down and Councillor McNulty's iPad is down. Is yours?
Nope,
My internet's shut down.
Oh.
The meeting is okay, but we just don't have video for any of our. I think Core Mobile shut down the internet. The Wi-Fi of the city.
But the Richmond internet's working.
Okay, I can't see Linda or no.
Okay, so I'll just have to use,
Just waiting. He's okay.
I think it's Bill.
Andy's okay, yeah.
I'm okay.
Linda, myself, and whoever.
I'm off.
okay, we'll just continue. Staff.
Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Hobbs, I don't have those numbers available right now, but certainly we could take a look and provide it to you. But I just want to sort of, because this is an important point, I think. While if you move from 10 to 15% in the city centre, and that's the only area that we're recommending that you do it, because the analysis shows that outside of the city centre for the smaller developers and builders, it's not viable. So we're not recommending it. But in the city centre where we are recommending it, absolutely, for a developer, there will be a higher cost on their pro forma associated with providing more Lemur units, because those units just aren't worth as much as an unrestricted market condo. But I do want to say again that you should not assume that additional cost to the developer will then increase the market price of that unit. And because that is determined in the broader market. And typically what it does, and again, Jerry can speak to this, is if the city imposes a higher Lemur requirement that costs the developer more, then the developer will be prepared to pay less for the other things in the pro forma, like land, construction, and the developer will likely have to take a smaller profit margin. And if you ask for too much, what you would typically see is a slowdown in development in Richmond. You would drive development out of Richmond to other communities. And we have not seen that. And we have not seen any sign or indication that moving to 15% would do that. In fact, the analysis shows that it will not.
Through the chair, if I may, just on that point, I understand we haven't seen that yet because we haven't changed anything to 15% yet. But I think, although you don't know for sure what will happen down the road, I'm fairly confident that when costs increase for anything, that despite the cost of land or the cost of labor or construction materials, which we don't have a lot of control over at the local market level, I do work under at least a loose assumption that the price will go up for the end user. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that's a reasonable assumption. But I did have a couple other questions, if I could.
Yes, continue.
Yeah, I'm still getting some feedback, so sorry. But now the economic study done, the Rollo report, I mean, one of the things that concerns me overall is by increasing fees and percentages, do we reach a tipping point where, 10% of 200 ends up being more than 15% of 100. So, the law of diminishing returns could kick in somewhere, and it's hard to tell when you get to that point. So I appreciate the Rollo report looks at that and says that we can take in that kind of increase for Lemur is what I'm talking about now. But we are potentially entering into an inflationary period in the world, certainly in North America, and you can see it with certain price indices. So did the Rollo report, which was probably done some time ago, take into account the impact of, say, a 2 to 3% increase in interest rates and entering into an inflationary period? And what would be the analysis of the impact on that on increasing, for instance, Lemur from 10 to 15%?
Madam Chair, if I may, I would suggest that we have Jerry Mulholland deal with that directly. That's his area of expertise.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Mulholland.
Thank you. So through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, in answer to your question regarding doing some sensitivity analysis around the interest rates rising by 2 to 3%, no, we didn't. What we did do is we used the benchmark requirements that all banks currently require for anybody going to seek out mortgages at this point, which are in around 5% for people looking to get approval for loans. So there's already a little bit of that built in because you can get a loan for anywhere between 2.5% and 3.5% fairly easily through any of the major banks. So there's already sort of that cushion built in with the requirement that you test it at 5%. So that would be my answer to that particular question. And if you would allow me to have some leeway to answer your previous question, I would concur that Mr. Ursig has it correct the way that we would view the situation. What we would perceive is that the market is fixed, that the developer is not doing their job if they are accepting less for a piece of property that they have for sale than what the market will bear. So where it comes out in the long term is that, again, with enough time and enough advance notice that you know it's coming as a developer, it's coming out of your bid price for future land that you're purchasing. So in the short term, the land you already have acquired to develop, you're kind of stuck with the price you paid for that, unless you have a contract that has something in place that would allow you to go back and revisit the price. But that's the whole point of allowing for the time for notification and consultation with UDI, as well as the recommendation for a grandfather period to allow for a period of time to pass for existing projects in the pipeline to get approved. But the point is that the end user is unlikely to actually change. You can only afford to pay what the bank will lend you or in what you have in current assets to pledge toward your mortgage. That doesn't change. If all of a sudden the prices of products rise dramatically because there's a change in the pricing from cost from municipality, that doesn't change what the average user does. What it does is it changes the curve of who can actually buy these units. You've all of a sudden shifted up and you said, instead of having a market of 1,500 people for this particular set of units, we now have a market of 1,000 people because we're pushing that price up. And it would be very rare that you would see that push up in price because, again, the developer is already pushing the prices to the maximum that the market will bear at this point in time when they're marketing the units.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't need to belabor that point. If I could just ask one more question through the chair.
Yep.
So with an increase in Lemur as an example, then the point we're talking about, is an increase in density and a decrease in the parking ratio. So for instance, actually this is getting into purpose-built rentals, but I'll ask it now anyway. So for purpose-built rentals, we heard some discussion about waiving of development cost charges, and I understand that things do cost money and they do get paid for from somewhere. But if the goal is to actually increase the number of purpose-built rentals in particular, then I would like to actually hear an answer to waiving development cost charges for purpose-built rental buildings. And also, an answer to, now I looked at when Councillor Day, I think, referred to the parking ratios, or no, maybe it was Councillor Lieu, and we looked at those. I'd also like a comment on lowering those to as low as 0.5, so we can have, so to speak, more heads in beds than cars and stalls. So, and that would be in particular in that proximity to the Canada line in the city center, which I forget if it's like a 10-minute walk or 400 meters or something like that. But is that something that is doable and practical? Because it's something that I've heard from a number of people. I think even Mr. Rossman was talking about this type of thing. And in a way to incentivize more purpose-built buildings in Richmond, those two things might be practical. I understand in other jurisdictions the parking ratio is even lower than what's on our attachment. Thank you.
Madam Chair, perhaps I can tackle that to Councillor Hobbs. Yes, we have different rental parking rates for rental within certain distances of Canada Line. Staff are not recommending further reduction in the zoning bylaw. Certainly it's Council's prerogative to give us direction otherwise, but based on our technical analysis, we are not recommending that you change the zoning bylaw to reduce those rates further. What we are suggesting and recommending is that we continue with the practice of project by project reviewing the demand for parking, and where there's a solid rationale, we would reduce that parking as part of the rezoning process. So I think that has served us well from my perspective in the past, and we think we should continue to do that. On the issue of waiving DCCs, of course, the problem is that when DCCs are waived, the money has to be found elsewhere. So as part of recommendation number 9, we're proposing that we take a more detailed look at doing that, but we are only recommending that for rental projects that would commit to and be bound to rental rates lower than the Lemur rate currently. Because frankly, giving developers a DCC break on market rental or on an existing obligation to provide a Lemur unit, I don't think is money well spent from the municipal end.
Sure. Just to wrap up that point, if I could, Yeah, I understand the case-by-case analysis that you mentioned, but it's interesting that in some situations, for instance, the Lemur percentage, we don't have a case-by-case. We have a hard and fast policy. So, you know, having some instances where we have a hard and fast black and white policy and having some other cases where we have case-by-case analysis and a little bit of negotiation, it's interesting. And anyway, I look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you.
Councillor McNulty, and then what we're going to do in appreciation of time is to go through and then go through them all. And no, I know, I'm going to go to you, but then after you, we're going to go through them all and then come back to questions on all of them. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, if I can, waiving DCCs unfortunately means the rest of the taxpayers of Richmond are subsidizing what have you, so we'd have to come up with a policy on how we feel about rental. But I'm not saying we shouldn't look at it. And I guess my two things, and Mr. Mulholland, is he still with us?
Yes.
I have a question of him. The question is, in the downtown core, let's say on Spires Road or whatever, in some of the older buildings there, let's say Cooney or Cook and whatever, if we pre-zone those and those people own those, are we not downgrading the zoning, if you wish, for low income, and we're actually taking money away from the people that own it because they can't sell it for as much? Because it would have, let's say it's $450,000 for the apartment that I have, whatever size it is. You come in and downzone it, I don't think I would ever seize 450 because I'm hoping to get 450 for it being upzoned. Am I wrong on that?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, that would probably require some nuanced analysis to really answer that question. But in a general sense, it would depend on what zoning was currently in place. So if the properties were currently zoned for single family, then speculative value isn't an entitlement for the current property owner. They would have to go through the process of getting a rezoning and meeting all the requirements of the city in order to capitalize and realize that increase in value for the land for the higher density there. If, however, what you're talking about is something that already had entitlements for a 3 FAR development, say, but what you do is you're now restricting the development to being rental only, then yes, conceivably you have reduced the value of the property. Certainly if you're requiring it to be below market or rental, or, you know, at the margin rental properties. Does that answer the question?
Well, not quite. Well, it does in theory, but I want to get to reality. If you take from Cooney Road to Garden City Road, we have many apartments and what have you that have been there for 50, 60 years. Okay, some of them are almost outliving their life. People are hanging on in there and their whole life savings is in there because they bought it or whatever. And we come along and say, we're going to make all that low income rental. Are we not, we would be down zoning as opposed to saying, no, we would upgrade it to be a market rental. I guess that's where I'm trying to get to understand the concept.
So again, through the chair, that's a hard question to answer without really looking at it in real detail. I would suggest that the suggestion to do that upzoning of that whole sort of quarter section of the city that we're talking about would be that there would be some increase in density involved, because I think those buildings that you're talking about are largely 2 to 4 stories. Yes. So if you were to say as of right, you'd be able to go up to 6, there would be an inherent lift in value of the property that would be owned in common among all of the strata owners of those properties, that if they are currently stratified condominiums. If they aren't, if they are just rental properties to begin with, really and truly all you're doing is you're holding that to being a rental property in perpetuity through enacting a rental tenure only zoning. And then with that, I will defer back to staff because it really would require more direction from them for me to answer anything further.
Madam Chair, if I may, on the two points, we actually have a referral on rental tenure zoning to look at the pure rental sites in Richmond and whether they would be protected so that they continue as pure rental sites. Your policy, your OCP policy requires that that be the case, but you have the option of actually putting more bylaw clout into that. So you can expect to see that report again, probably in November, certainly before Christmas. On the first question about, well, what would likely be the value impact on, say, an older strata property if the city was to zone it for rental only? Anecdotally, I can comment because we're dealing with a couple of sites now. I think that you would get a really strong negative reaction from the strata owners because they would see it as a downzoning. In fact, at a staff level, we're getting considerable pressure in those situations to crank up the density way beyond what the OCP and neighbourhood plans currently allow. So, you know, my hunch is that if you were to do that as a council, certainly you can do it, but you would get probably a lot of resistance from the strata owners.
Thank you. And I guess my other question on our PN 45 on the parking, coming back, is are these numbers here in relation to what we originally set out with the SkyTrain coming to Richmond, that we would reduce parking and encourage people to take the bus, which is a new bus loop out there, and the SkyTrain, and we were going to cut back on parking and force people to get out of their cars and use public transit?
Madam Chair, if I may, yes, they are. When we made those changes, we reflected the existence of the SkyTrain stations in the parking rates, and then made further reductions for rental units.
Good, thank you, good job.
Councillor Steves, I see you, but what we're going to do, I will come back to you in a few minutes. So I'm going to ask staff to continue along, and then we'll ask questions at the end. Mr. Hopkins?
Oh, okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Just give me a minute here to get my notes. What I'll do is I'll just give a quick summary, I guess, of the remaining recommendations. The second recommendation is a follow-up to the Lemur, first one on Lemur, and it's to do with updating the Lemur cash and lieu rates to reflect current construction costs and sale prices in Richmond, and to reflect the 15% Lemur requirement in the city centre. This would be the first update since 2017, which were based on a 10% Lemur requirement. The revised cash and lieu rates were part of the economic feasibility analysis, and it has been determined that the majority of developments would be feasible, including projects advanced by small builders. So staff would also review the cash and lieu rates every 2 years to ensure rates remain relevant and up to date. Recommendations 3, 4, 5, and 6 all relate to introducing a mandatory market rental requirement for multifamily residential projects. It would also include a modest density bonus that's built into the zoning amendments. Although the residential rental tenure zoning legislation tool is used elsewhere in the province, Richmond would be the first municipality to utilize it to require a mandatory amount of market rental in multifamily residential projects. This would be in addition to the 100% market rental incentive program that we're currently using, which has been quite successful. The recommendation also includes a cash and lieu component for projects that are less than 60 units, and would also apply to pre-zoned multifamily residential sites. An alternative approach is to continue to rely on the existing voluntary policy, which is working well. However, if a mandatory program is in place, it would ensure a continuous stream of market rental units. Recommendation 7 would apply a 1-year grandfathering period for in-stream development applications. Rezoning applications would have to be received prior to bylaw adoption, which could be as early as mid-November if these bylaws are adopted this year. And those applications would need to receive first reading within a year of bylaw adoption, which could be mid-November of next year. The 1-year grandfathering period is consistent with the last update of the Lemur program and is consistent with provincial legislation that applies to in-stream applications when DCC rates are increased. Recommendation 8 would recommend that staff monitor and report back to council regarding key findings in 2 years. And lastly, recommendation 9 recommends that staff review the feasibility of waiving development cost charges for built affordable housing developments with rental rates established below standard Lemur rates. We're currently reviewing the DCC rates right now, so this could dovetail into that work quite nicely. Happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Steves, back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of general comments. I've got a whole pages and pages of comments I'd like to make, but I'll refrain from doing it. This is my last year in council, and it's very frustrating to go through this discussion because I've seen ways that we have brought in affordable housing, affordable rental over the decades, and they've been set by the wayside. Way back in 1968 or 69, we didn't have so many restrictions in the official community plan. We didn't have this 702 process. And in my neighborhood, for example, on 7th Avenue, the land between 7th Avenue and the Dike was zoned for industry, and most of it. A little strip in front of my house was for 8 single-family 30-foot lots. We made an agreement with the developer to put in affordable housing on most of that land, and so we simply upgraded everything from industry to affordable housing, and what is called Mariners Village sold at 43 to 45% of the market rates. The market rate of a single-family house at that time, it was $100,000. They sold those units for $43,000. So that was our first affordable housing in Richmond, and that's how we did it. We captured the lift. Across the street from me, we did exactly the same thing. There was 8 single-family 33-foot lots in a block that were unbuilt on, and an equal amount of land that was industry. And we worked that out, and it became a co-op. And we got federal and provincial funding for it, but a lot of it was done through the mortgages and everything else. It didn't cost Richmond anything. And we ended up with co-op housing. All those ideas have gone by the wayside. And I guess when we're dealing with the downtown core, I think we have the right, when we rezone a property, to capture the lift the way we used to do then. And to say, yes, we'd like low-end market housing here. In terms of Spires Road, yes, people will complain, but the lift should belong to the city. And if we got 3-story houses, let's make it 6 stories, and we've got the lift. And the lift then provides for the low-end market housing or affordable housing, whichever we want. So I guess that was one of the concerns I had when this was referred back. We haven't dealt with any of that left, but I really would like to see us deal with it before I retire a year from now, because I just think we're missing the boat. John Roston said that there's 30,000 people commuting into Richmond. And about 20 or 30 years ago, when the growth of the downtown core started, we were planning an LRT down 3 Road, and we actually put in the services for rapid bus. We met with the development committee at that time, and we asked the developers where are people going to live that work in the downtown core, and they said they're going to have to commute because they won't be able to afford living in downtown Richmond. They actually told us that. We got the answer from the provincial government recently. There's no present idea of having LRT coming into the community, so they can't come in economically from the rest of the region on LRT. So these 30,000 people have to drive here. They can't live here. We are not dealing with them. We're not dealing with 1 million people that's probably going to head here into this region within the next few years because of climate change. We were told way back in 1973, when the heat finally hits the American Southwest and California, we're going to see millions of people moving north. Already 1 in 5 people in Oregon are from California, and that's going to continue. So we've got to solve this problem, and we've got to start solving it now. So I'm prepared to support all this stuff, but I'm really upset that I don't think we're really dealing with the issue, and I'd really like to see us come up with a plan that's going to have a meaningful answer to the problems we're having now and the future problems we're going to have. So that's my comment for now.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So the staff recommendations for number 1 and number 2, staff recommends increases, but in the GP Rollo report, they actually recommended a phased-in approach. A graduated rollout is recommended specifically because there is a wide range of land values reported by the city's real estate staff, and this would allow time for expectations at the higher end of pricing to be curtailed. Just wondering why staff went ahead with one shot instead of spreading it out over time. Although you list it as an alternative, it is not your recommendation.
To the chair, and perhaps I might pass this on to Mr. Spencer, but I guess to begin with, it's been several years since the cash and lieu rates have been increased, and we're also reflecting a 15% Lemur contribution rate as well, which is why they've increased substantially. But because of the 4-year gap, construction costs have gone up significantly, and is the main reason why we need to do some quick catch up on the cash and lieu rates. But I don't know if Cody, if you have anything else to add to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to confirm, the analysis completed by GP Rollo suggests that the proposed rates are appropriate for the vast majority of developments starting as of today, but recommendations 1 and 2 are meant to work in conjunction with recommendation 7, which relates to in-stream applications and a proposed 1-year grandfathering period.
Thank you. Now, in recommendation number 2, it says that the following changes be approved and updated every 2 years. Can you explain that to me? Does that mean there's going to be an increase every 2 years?
Madam Chair, not necessarily. That reference in the report is referencing several actions in the city's affordable housing strategy, which directs staff to review various aspects of the program, including contribution rates, every 2 years.
So it's review and update if necessary.
That's correct. Update as needed, and information would be provided to council at that time.
Because as I read it, it just sounds like automatically every 2 years it's updated, which I don't know if we wanted to do that. Okay, so I might make a small word change there. And then just a question of procedure. At the June 23rd Planning Committee meeting, there was a motion that in-stream rezoning applications are grandfathered under the current market rental housing policy, and that was carried. Now, it is again in recommendation number 7. So just a question of the process. So really, at the June 23rd meeting, we made that, and it was just taken as staff direction then, or is it not doing it double then?
Madam Chair, perhaps I can tackle that one. I think at that meeting, we had brought this forward a couple of times, and we were looking at a referral, and the time frame was well, unclear. So we interpreted that as direction for staff, for how to proceed with applications that staff are currently dealing with day to day. And so we have recommended as part of this package that grandfathering be provided. If there's a feeling amongst the majority that the existing resolution already deals with this issue, then it can be removed.
All right, thank you. Councillor McNulty?
Yeah, if I can, just following up on a number of quick questions. I mean, we've got to get on to something because obviously right now we don't have anything that is current. In item number 7, how many things have we got, how many applications are in stream, how many are inquiries, and if we leave it for a year, what do we lose? We've got a couple major developments going on right now, and unless we implement this, we're not going to get any housing out of it. So I guess, what do we lose? That was not in the report.
Madam Chair, perhaps I could...
sorry.
I'm going to, perhaps I can get the ball rolling, and I'll ask Wayne to chime in after me with some numbers of actual applications. But certainly I have a concern that if we take too long to consider whether the rules are going to change, then some projects that currently would not be grandfathered, significant projects, would be grandfathered. So the obvious example is Lansdowne, the Van Prop property. I can tell you that staff met with the new CEO and their Director of Development. They are forging ahead. They're looking for a development partner, and they want to pull the trigger on their first phase rezoning. So if we were to take too long to contemplate whether we want to change the policy, they might end up being grandfathered at 10% rather than have to follow the new rules, which would be for them 15 and the mandatory market rental. And Wayne, do you have any data about how many applications are already in the door?
Through the chair, I can provide some high level. In terms of rezoning applications, we have approximately 100 under staff review currently. Of those applications, I'd have to actually look into what the breakdown is in terms of greater than 60 units versus less than 60 units. In terms of purpose-built market rental applications, which are submitted under the current incentive policy we have in place, we have approximately half a dozen applications representing a total of 750 new units.
So I guess that's my point to the chair. I think we have to look at that one very carefully. The other one, a question if I may, because I think we've got to look at putting some strong principles down, is in number 3, I have no problem with that, but what kind of density are we talking about? Are we giving if we were in to incentivize getting market rental? Are we, or is that negotiable? Depending on if I come along and say I'll build 60 units, and you get 10% of it of the floor space. I guess what I'm trying to see is number 3 being an incentive to build more and give higher density to those people and give us 20% market rental, whatever. And you know, I think we have to look at it from an economic point of view. If we were a builder, we'd never go to the bank to borrow that money unless we could make a little bit on it. We're not going to build on it. So I guess that's what I was looking at. Number 3 is density versus and keeping prices down. Okay, if we because that could be an incentive.
Madam Chair, perhaps I can respond through you to Councillor McNulty. At this time, there is a density bonus of up to 0.25 FAR in the various zones and bylaws. In addition to that, we have brought you and will continue to bring you developments which are 100% market rental for the additional density, and that go well beyond that. And some examples we've talked about in the Spires area, where the density has increased by about 0.8 FAR. And of course, those proposals are always subject to acceptance and approval by council. And presumably they need to be palatable to the community as well. But yes, 3 is definitely, and there's definitely incentives built in to the provision of the market rental.
Okay, all right, that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Wolf?
Thank you. Through the chair, it's a comment, question, and then another comment. First off, this would have followed really well after Councillor Hobbs was speaking and his line of questions on purpose-built rentals. Although he was speaking under the item number 1, or subsection 1, it also fits really well with subsection 9, as you referred. And also, I echo the comments from Councillor Steeves that he just made. But my interpretation of those comments is that we shouldn't be supporting this item as it stands, that it requires amendments. Anyhow, my question, between 2010 and 2020, how many purpose-built rental units roughly did Richmond produce? I just heard we had 750 new units coming, but in the last decade, what's our number been?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf. Oh, perhaps Wayne might have some numbers.
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, from 2018 to now, the city has secured 568 rental units, market rental units.
Perfect. Thank you for that up-to-date answer right away. My next, I guess, final comment to committee. I made a request for staff to provide comments, and they dug deep and got some numbers for us. I'd encourage you before the council meeting, if this item is carried forward, to search up our memo from April 26th of this year, April 26, 2021. It's called Request for Information on Development of Multifamily Residential Units. It's just 4 pages. But to me, looking at it, it really exemplifies what needs to be done today with this report. It mentions the roughly 7,500 developments that have been completed or are currently under construction. And then it talks about the next 7,500 that are undergoing review or building permit issuance. And to hear that only 10% of those, the roughly 750 new units are coming, that speaks to a direction that is going to give us the status quo, more or less, and not providing what I think we can add in subsection 1 here. When we talk about upping the percentage, could we not also be specifying areas in the city center for more purpose-built rental? And as we just heard, the urgency, there's projects that are going to get grandfathered in. So I think getting that, I think that's one of the big pieces missing. It was brought up by a delegate and in his written contributions as well. And that's what I've heard from the public, the renters in Richmond, is the need for that. And I think there's incentives in here, but that's the piece missing. So I'll leave that as a comment. Thank you.
Councillor Day? It's not on the floor quite yet. There's no motion on the floor. Did you want to move the motion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Looking really forward to the report coming back about creating a rental tenure zone for the Spires area. I think that's the perfect area for it. And I'm intrigued by some of the comments that we heard earlier from Mr. Dana Westermark about being more creative in the residential neighborhoods. So after we voted on this, I do have a motion to look at existing neighborhoods.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, yes. Well,
before you go, I just wanted to, if it's all right with committee, in number 2, it says to change that. So it says that the following changes to the low-end market rental cash and lieu rates be approved and updated. I'm going to say be approved and reviewed every 2 years, because as I read it, it just kind of said automatically every 2 years it would be updated. Is that okay with committee?
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Okay, great. Continue, Mr. Mayor. Sorry.
No problem. On that last point about areas in the city, I understood staff to say that they already have a referral on rental tenure, and I think that that's what they're talking about. They can either comment now or in due course. Joe, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. We have a referral. We have had a report up once or twice, and we plan to bring that back next month.
Yeah, we've had a very full conversation about this, and I'm going to be supporting the whole thing. I do have a referral to make to talk about some related things that was in the beginning of our conversation, but I'll wait till this matter is disposed of first. So I'll be supporting.
Thank you. Councillor Lieu?
Thank you. I generally support most of this. I think a lot of it makes sense. I do question layering on the market rental on top of the low-end market rental. I think pick one or the other for the time being. If our market rental program is already working and staff's told us that it's brought forward a whole bunch of rental units, then I think that's the way to go. So then maybe it makes sense just to increase our low-end market rental. I agreed with Councillor McPhail in doing it over 2 years and bringing it in, spreading it out over time. I think that makes sense, and it gives the market some time to adjust to these things. You know, I took Economics 101 too, and I seem to recall it was about red pens and blue pens, and you were indifferent between the two, so it was fairly elastic, was what they called the curves. So, but in this exercise, I think it's a slightly more inelastic, so you've got a steeper demand curve. People still are willing to move a little bit on their prices because you still have to sleep somewhere, you still have to live somewhere. You're not getting across the Fraser very quickly anytime soon. You know, this is where you want to be. You want to be in Richmond. And so when you have the supply side and then you add a price to it, sure, the developer takes some of it, but the consumer actually takes the most of it. So, you know, we are sticking it to the consumer at the end of the day too. So, you know, when we talk about attainable housing, this makes it less attainable. And I think if we spread it out over 2 years, it averages it out. So for that person who's saving up, trying to get into the market, it gives them a little bit of a fighting chance. Because like I said, if we go with the numbers that we're talking about, your 1,000 square foot apartment in Richmond could bump up almost as much as $28,500 for your 1,000 square foot. And maybe, yeah, it's not all going to be absorbed by the consumer, but if it's even half, that adds a big chunk to your down payment if you're trying to get into the market. You know, I agree with what Councillor Steve said about creating market tenure zoning, but he was talking about doing it on somewhere that was not already zoned for something else, not already in the OCP for something bigger and different. He was talking about looking at some different places that we want to upzone. He wasn't talking about downzoning things. He was talking about upzoning things to add more to spaces. So I'd support that, or a motion or a referral to look at that. Or don't we already have one of those on the we have an existing one to look at places.
Rental tenure.
Add rental tenure that would effectively upzone it and create the incentive.
Yes, Mr. Ersick said there is a referral on that.
Okay.
Do we have a timeline for that, Mr. Ersick, the rental tenure?
Madam Chair, our intention is to bring that report in November.
Thank you.
So I'd like to make an amendment that on the first one we bring it in over 2 years, 12 and a half in the first year and 15 in the second year.
You're moving an amendment?
I'm moving an
Is there a seconder?
amendment.
I'll second it for discussion. Do you want to speak to anything else?
No, that's fine.
I support that amendment. I think that we've had some really good discussions, and it was in the Rollo report that they supported that, and I think this is a big hit to the development community. We need to work with the development community to achieve the goals that we want for our community. And I think that if we don't have that early conversation with them and that phased-in approach, letting them know what's coming down the pipe, people are not going to come to Richmond and people aren't going to build. Any other discussion on the amendment? Councillor Day.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I won't be supporting the amendment because I think this has been in the works for as long as I've been a councillor, and there's been talk of making these changes, and I think that all of the developers are well aware that this is coming and have known for a long time. If for some reason, Councillor McPhail is correct, and we do see a lull for a short period of time, I think that's a price that I'd be more than happy to pay because let's face it, in Richmond, you build it and they will come. So I think that staff have done a great job of coming up with the item, number one, and I think we should approve it as written.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Councillor McNulty?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to support the amendment. I think we've got to think about the longtime builders that have built our community. And when I look at going from $8.50 square foot to $18, which is an increase of 112%.
We're just on number one. The amendment was just to change number one, but
Oh, okay. Well,
but there may be an amendment for number two.
Well, I think, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were doing the whole thing. Okay.
Is that correct, Councillor?
No, I support number one, and
one.
I support the amendment. I think phasing it in with people again, it's make my comment. It's great when the fly-by-night developer comes in and plops in and takes on a big project, etc. But the backbone of this community is those people who've been here for many years, and I think that we've got to support them and give them the opportunity to do it, and I think we shouldn't forget that. It's great when, if you wish, offshore money comes into a community, and pick that up and is able to help invest and help the economy. But then what about the small builder? What about the local guy that takes some beautiful homes, let's say on Stevenson Highway, takes a 50-foot lot and divides it in half and makes two lovely little homes that are achievable for people. So I'll support the amendment phasing in. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, first of all, I think it should be noted for the last comments that the increase from 10 to 15% is only for the city center area. So we're not talking about the little guy who builds something, farther south or whatever. The second thing is, if you're going to change number one, what changes are you making to the grandfathering? Because the way it reads now, it's a one-shot deal. Depends on the timing of your application, and then you got a year from then.
Sorry, I thought we were going item by item as we.
We are not. The whole
Okay.
thing's
Whole
on
thing
the
is on
floor.
the floor.
The amendment's on the floor. And I asked the question, what would we do with grandfathering if we do it that way?
Our grandfathering, and I think we should also bring in.
Anyways.
The cash and Lieu rates.
I'll let you speak and close the argument. And are you finished, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to my question, though.
Well, perhaps we could ask staff for clarification.
Madam Chair, it would be up to committee and council, but my view would be that if you phase this, if you two-step the Lemur increase, 12.5% for a year and then 15%, there is no need for grandfathering because it would become incredibly cumbersome, I think, to figure out what the rules are. So we did recommend as staff just moving straight to 15%. The one-year grandfathering, in effect, cushions that for people that are in the pipeline. But my recommendation to you would be that if you want to go with a two-step approach for Lemur, then dispense with the grandfathering.
Councillor Lieu, I'll let you close. Any closing comments?
Yeah, I think that moving to a graduated approach makes a lot of sense. I think also that then the cash in Lieu rate should also be on a graduated approach over those 2 years. And if that means that we don't need grandfathering, I think if we do have a one-year grandfathering, then you're grandfathered for each year that you come in. So if you come in this year, you're at 10, you come in next year, you're at 12.5, you come in the next year, you get your grandfathering at 15%. And if in a couple of years council decides they're moving up to some other number, then those people have been grandfathered their 1 year.
All right. I will call the question on the amendment. Those in favor? Opposed? It is defeated with Councillor Day, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor McNulty in the opposition. Back to the main motion. And no, he's not on committee. Oh, sorry. Councillor Steeves in the opposition. Yeah. Thank you. Did you get that, Mr. Clerk? So it was only Councillor Lieu and Councillor McPhail in favor. All right. Back to the main motion, to questions. Councillor Hobbs.
Sorry, I was seeking clarification on what you already voted on, so that's done. Thanks.
Councillor Steeves.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I'm prepared to support the main motion because I think we have to close all the loopholes right now. I don't like the idea of not grandfathering. I will raise that later because the ones that have to be grandfathered, we get to rezone them in the end. And I just want to put forward a comment on Polygon. I knew Mike O'Dane way back around 1961. I knew him for years, and he was in the freedom marches in the United States, quite a progressive individual. And I guess the challenge I'd put out to Polygon, maybe they could leave a legacy and start providing a little more affordable housing as he reaches his retirement. Be great to see a legacy of the future, and I'm going to be looking forward to staff negotiating a better deal with Polygon than we're getting at present.
Councillor McNulty?
No, sorry, I took it down. Thank you.
All right, any other speakers? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried with Councillor Lieu and Councillor McPhail in the opposition. Now, Councillor Day, you said you had an amendment, no, a referral?
You know, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to hold off on that. I've decided after this very intense conversation, I'd like to sit down with staff and mull it over and get some more information from them first.
Mr. Mayor, you had a referral?
I do. It goes back to the original delegation that we heard from this evening. And while I'm not looking for staff to go out and dig up statistics, I think that we should get more information from staff so that we can have a more effective approach to figuring out whether our Lemur program has been successful or not, more than just having a pure number of units and assuming that that means success if we get enough of them. I think it's more complicated than that. So I just stress, my referral isn't asking the staff to go out and seek out the information. It's simply to talk about the approach. So the referral would be for staff, that staff be directed to consider input needed to establish benchmarks to measure and optimize the effectiveness of the Lemur program, such as vacancy rates, the use of the units by Richmond residents, the adherence to income restrictions and changes in income, and the amount of assets owned by potential occupants.
Second.
Yeah.
Been seconded. Anything else you wanted to add?
I'll just simply say, armed with the information as to what we're doing and how we're approaching it, then we can, make some more substantive decisions as to how we pursue it and whatever. But I do think it behooves us to really get a better idea of the success of the entire program, which I believe will show that we've been very successful, but we need to measure it.
Councillor Steves?
I support that. However, I'm not so sure we have been that successful because I agree with John Roston of the 30,000 people that can't afford to live here. So I think we need to take that into consideration as well. But certainly we need to know who's going into the units. Are the units used? Are they empty? Are they people that are faking their income? What is happening, and how successful is it? Because if it's successful and we need more, then we need to look at some of these other options, I think, fairly quickly. So I certainly support this motion.
Councillor Day?
Yeah, I'll absolutely supporting the motion as well. I've been door knocking, and when you see a BMW parked in front of a co-op housing unit, you got to ask yourself, what's going on here? So, and I wonder if we shouldn't pass on the information that we receive from staff to Vancouver Coast Health Authority, or not the Housing Authority.
All right, seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried, and I actually have a motion as well, and I'm going to call it the Affordable Housing Advocacy Motion. And the motion is that the City of Richmond write to Metro Vancouver, Province of BC, and the federal government advocating for more funding and solutions for affordable housing. And my rationale is that, after listening to all, thank you. Thank you for the second. After listening to the months and months of discussion, I realized that we're doing this all on our own. Yes, there have been some instances of projects, but really, we're out here on our own. So my rationale is the city create an advocacy document outlining its efforts to bring more affordable housing units to the city, share successes, challenges, and opportunities. We have a good track record of working with the community and other partners to bring innovative projects online. We are going to ask all levels of government to work with us, and we are all in this together. Any discussion? Councillor Day?
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Steves, do you want to go first? sorry.
No.
Okay.
Councillor Day.
I think it's a great motion. I think that it's something we're all passionate about here at council. Every day we hear stories about people that are living in carports and garages because there's just nowhere to live. And we need help from the federal and provincial government. And given that there was just an election and all these promises were made, let's call them up on it and let's make sure that they know that we're ready and willing to get to work, roll up our sleeves and make this happen. But we can't do it alone. And I thank you for the motion.
Councillor Steves?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for that motion as well. We've got 3 NDP MLAs now, and I want to put a challenge out to them. When I was MLA, we basically put the co-op program forward and with the federal government. And I went around to Richmond Council, and we ended up getting probably the most co-op housing anywhere in British Columbia, if not all of Canada. And subsequent governments dropped the feds dropped the financing of it, and the province was very happy about that, and so they dropped it too. And we never tried to be creative like we were with the one across the street, where we actually took a piece of land zoned industrial and said, if you put co-ops there, we'll give you an upward zoning. And I think that that's the way the city deals with it. You don't have to buy the land. You can make as we did at Terra Nova, you make an agreement with a developer, and that's the last one we got, I think, where if you rezone a very large piece of land, you can set aside for co-ops. But you can also give a lift, as Councillor Lieu suggested. I was not suggesting that we downzone anybody, but we should make our bylaws a little more flexible so we can give that lift in a block or large area sometime to create co-op housing or rental housing or affordable housing. And I think that we need to talk to our MLAs and see if they can't bring that program back again.
All right, seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It is carried. Thank you, and I believe that is all. So manager's report, I think we have one. Mr. Craig?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a reminder that the city's online engagement, City Snapshots, is active through the Let's Talk Richmond portal. The app that.
And that was it. All right.
Yes, it will run from now until the 24th.
All right. Thanks very much. And seeing no further business.
Move adjournment.
I look for adjournment. All those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.